The serving dish hit the bottom of the trash can with a wet, heavy thud. I stood in the doorway of my mother-in-law's kitchen, watching her press the lid down with both hands like she was sealing something dangerous. She didn't see me yet, but my husband did, and the look on his face, somewhere between fury and exhaustion, told me this wasn't going to end with an apology. My mother-in-law tossed out the food she assumed I made for the family gathering, and the fallout was spectacular. My name is Darcy Embry, and for 7 years, I thought I was doing everything right. I'm 34, married to a man named Gage, mother to a 5-year-old named Tatum, and I work as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized shipping company. My life isn't glamorous, but it's mine, and I've worked hard for every stable, peaceful corner of it. Gage and I met through a mutual friend at a cookout almost a decade ago. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who shows up early and stays late. His mother, Paulette, was the opposite. Loud, opinionated, always the center of every room. For the first couple of years, I told myself that was just her personality. Confident women get mislabeled all the time, right? I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I really did. But there were signs early on. The first Thanksgiving I spent with the Embry family, Paulette looked at the pecan pie I'd brought and said, "Oh, you bought one from the store? That's fine, sweetie. Not everyone has time to bake." I'd made it from scratch. Spent 4 hours on the crust alone. Gage squeezed my hand under the table and, "She does that. Just let it go." And I did. For years I let it go. There were other moments. The time she rearranged my entire kitchen when she came to help after Tatum was born. The baby shower she planned without telling me, then acted hurt when I seemed surprised by the guest list, half of which were her friends I'd never met. The time she looked at a family photo of Gage and me on our mantel and said, "You know, he almost married Brianne Kelsey. She was lovely." Just dropped it into conversation like a grenade wrapped in small talk. Each time I'd look at Gage and he'd give me this expression, half wince, half plea. "Don't escalate. She's my mom. It'll pass." And it always did pass, technically, but it never actually went away. It just settled into the walls of our marriage like something you stop smelling because you've been breathing it so long. Gage's younger sister, Waverly, was always somewhere in the middle. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't exactly an ally either. She had this habit of laughing nervously whenever Paulette made a dig at me and then changing the subject. I used to think she was just keeping the peace. Later, I realized she was protecting herself. Meanwhile, at work, things were getting heavier. My manager, a woman named Renata, had taken a leave of absence for a health issue, and I'd been absorbing her responsibilities without the title or the pay bump. I was running on caffeine and resentment, coming home exhausted, trying to be present for Tatum while fielding emails at 9 o'clock at night. Gage noticed. He started picking up more around the house without being asked, folding laundry, handling bath time. He never complained. That's the thing about Gage. He doesn't complain. He just quietly holds things together until he can't. Sometimes I think I missed the cracks in our foundation because I was so busy watching for cracks in everything else. The real trouble started 6 weeks before the annual Embry family gathering. Paulette hosted it every year at her house. A big potluck-style event with aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole extended web. Each person was assigned a dish. Paulette ran it like a general running a campaign. She sent out a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet. This year, she assigned me a green bean casserole. Classic. Simple. I could have made it in my sleep. But 2 weeks before the event, I got a call from Gage's aunt, Colleen. She was Paulette's older sister, sharper, kinder, and she'd always treated me like family. "Darcy, honey," Colleen said on the phone, her voice low like she was telling me a secret. "I want you to bring my bourbon peach cobbler to the gathering. I'm having knee surgery next week and I won't be able to come, but I want it there. It's tradition." I said, "Of course." Colleen walked me through the recipe step by step. It was detailed. Specific brands of bourbon, a particular kind of brown sugar. She made me promise not to substitute anything. I wrote it all down. "One more thing," Colleen said. "Don't tell Paulette it's my recipe. She'll find a reason to have a problem with it." That should have been my warning. The week before the gathering, Tatum came down with an ear infection. 2 nights of almost no sleep, a trip to urgent care, and a course of antibiotics that she fought like a tiny, furious warrior every single dose. I was running on fumes. Gage took a half day off work to help, and even then, we were both wrecked. The night before the gathering, I was up until 1 in the morning making the cobbler. The kitchen smelled incredible. Warm bourbon, caramelized peaches, brown sugar crust. Gage wandered in around midnight, leaned against the counter, and watched me work. "You know she's going to find something wrong with it," he said. "Probably. So why are you killing yourself over this?" "Because Colleen asked me to. And because maybe, just maybe, your mom will taste it and actually say something nice." He gave me this look. Not pity exactly. More like the look you give someone walking toward a cliff who thinks they're walking toward a meadow. "I'll back you up," he said. "Whatever happens." I should have realized then how certain he was that something would happen. The day of the gathering was unseasonably warm. One of those freak late autumn days where the heat comes back for an encore nobody asked for. The air felt thick and wrong, like the weather itself was warning us. Paulette's house was already crowded when we arrived. Kids running in the yard, uncles arguing about football on the porch, the kitchen a controlled chaos of aluminum foil and crock-pots. The smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes hit me the second we walked through the door. I carried the cobbler in a deep glass baking dish covered in foil and set it on the dessert table next to a store-bought pumpkin pie and a tray of brownies. Tatum immediately wiggled out of Gage's arms and bolted toward the backyard, where her second cousin, a 7-year-old named Rory, was already setting up some kind of obstacle course with lawn chairs. Waverly found me almost immediately. She was wearing a cardigan despite the heat, arms crossed tight against her ribs. She looked tense. "Mom's in a mood," she said quietly. "When isn't she?" "No, like, a mood. She found out Colleen isn't coming and she's convinced it's some kind of statement." "It's knee surgery, Waverly." "I know that. You know that. Mom thinks it's a snub." I told myself to stay calm. I checked on Tatum, who was already happily chasing her second cousin around the backyard. I fixed myself a glass of sweet tea. I tried to just exist in the space without bracing for impact. Looking back, I can see exactly how slowly the fuse was burning. I just didn't know where it led. About an hour before dinner, I went inside to use the restroom. When I came back down the hallway, I heard Paulette's voice from the kitchen. She was talking to Gage's cousin Martin. "She brought some kind of cobbler," Paulette said, and her tone was the verbal equivalent of an eye roll. "Didn't even make the casserole I assigned. Just showed up with whatever she felt like making. That's Darcy for you. Always doing her own thing." Martin mumbled something non-committal. "I'm not putting it out," Paulette continued. "If she can't follow simple instructions, she doesn't get table space." My stomach dropped. I stood in that hallway with my back against the wall, and I felt every single dismissal from the past 7 years stack up like bricks on my chest. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I went outside, found Gage near the grill, and told him what I'd heard. "She said that?" "Word for word. I'll talk to her." "Gage, don't—" But he was already walking toward the house. Here's where things went sideways. Gage went inside, and I followed about a minute behind. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I saw it. Paulette standing at the trash can, pressing the lid down over the cobbler dish. The glass dish I'd borrowed from Colleen. The cobbler I'd stayed up until 1 in the morning to make. Gone. Just gone. Gage was standing 3 feet away. His face was white. "Mom," he said, and his voice was barely controlled. "What did you just do?" "I made room on the table," Paulette said, brushing her hands together. "She didn't bring what I asked for, so—" "That wasn't hers to bring. Aunt Colleen asked her to make it." Paulette's face shifted. Just a flicker. The tiniest crack in her armor. "Colleen?" "Colleen's bourbon peach cobbler. The one she's made for this gathering for 20 years. Darcy made it from her exact recipe because Colleen is having surgery and couldn't be here." The kitchen went quiet. Martin was standing near the fridge, frozen mid-pour. Waverly had appeared in the other doorway, holding a stack of napkins. Paulette recovered fast. "Well, how was I supposed to know that? She didn't tell me." "Because Colleen told her not to," Gage said. "Because Colleen knew you'd do exactly this. Find a reason to tear it apart." I've never heard Gage talk to his mother like that. In 7 years, he'd always been the diplomat, the buffer, but something had snapped. I could hear it in his voice. Not rage, but something heavier. Resignation. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It means someone has finally stopped pretending. Paulette looked at me. "You could have just told me." "Would it have mattered?" I said, and I meant it. Not as a jab, as a real question. If I'd told you it was Colleen's recipe, would you have left it alone? Or would you have found another reason? She didn't answer, and that was the answer. Waverly set the napkins down on the counter. Mom, she said softly, she's right. Every head in the kitchen turned toward Waverly, including Paulette's. You do this, Waverly continued. Every time, every gathering, you find something wrong with what Darcy brings, what she wears, how she talks to Tatum. I've watched you do it for years, and I never said anything because I didn't want to be next. Paulette stared at her daughter like she was speaking another language. Waverly, this is not the time. It's exactly the time. Because Darcy isn't the only one you do it to. You did it to Dad's sister before the divorce. You did it to Martin's wife until she stopped coming. You do it to anyone who gets close enough to this family that you can't control them. Martin quietly set down his glass and left the room. I stood there watching something I never expected to witness. Waverly, who had spent years laughing nervously and changing the subject, standing in her mother's kitchen and telling the truth. Not with anger, with exhaustion. The same exhaustion I saw in Gage's face. Paulette's eyes were wet. She turned away from all of us and gripped the edge of the counter. For 1 second, I thought she might apologize, might crack open, might say something real. I think you all should go, she said. Her voice was flat, final. We left. Gage carried Tatum to the car. She was confused, asking why we were leaving before the pie, and Gage told her we'd get ice cream on the way home. Waverly walked out beside me, arms crossed, staring at the ground. A couple of cousins watched us from the porch, but nobody said anything. The heat was finally breaking, a breeze coming through that smelled like rain. I should have said something years ago, Waverly said. You said it today. Too late, probably. Maybe, maybe not. She hugged me before she got in her car. It was the first time she'd ever hugged me without Paulette watching. We drove home in near silence. Tatum fell asleep in the back seat with chocolate ice cream still on her chin. Gage had kept his promise and pulled through a drive-thru. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands and didn't look at me until we pulled into the driveway. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For not doing that sooner. For asking you to let it go every time. For making you think keeping the peace was more important than your dignity. I reached over and put my hand on his. You showed up today. That matters. That night, after Tatum was in bed, I called Colleen. She answered on the second ring, groggy from pain meds. How'd the cobbler go over? She asked. I told her everything, the whole ugly scene. She was quiet for a long time. Darcy, she finally said. I sent you in there with that recipe because I knew what she'd do. I wanted someone to finally see it. I'm sorry I used you for that. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something shift. Colleen hadn't just given me a recipe, she'd given me a mirror, held it up to the whole family dynamic so clearly that nobody could look away anymore. Are you angry? I asked. At Paulette? Honey, I've been angry for 30 years. I'm just tired now. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to. Some lessons cost you something to learn, and the price isn't always obvious until much later. In the weeks that followed, things didn't wrap up neatly. There was no tearful apology from Paulette, no family meeting where everyone hugged it out. Paulette called Gage twice, once to tell him Waverly had embarrassed her in front of the whole family, and once to say I had turned her children against her. Gage listened both times, then calmly told her that until she could acknowledge what she'd done, he needed space. The second call ended with Paulette hanging up mid-sentence. She also called Waverly. That conversation, from what Waverly told me later, lasted 45 minutes and consisted mostly of Paulette saying, "After everything I've done for this family." Waverly held her ground. She told her mother she loved her, but that love didn't mean pretending. Paulette told her she sounded just like your father, which, given that their father had been out of the picture for 15 years, was clearly meant as an insult. Waverly took it as a compliment. Waverly started calling me on her own after that. Not about Paulette, just to talk. About her job, her dating life, a show she was watching. It was the first time in 7 years she'd treated me like a sister instead of a bystander. One night she called while I was making dinner, and we stayed on the phone for an hour while I chopped onions, and she complained about a coworker who kept microwaving fish in the break room. It was the most normal, easy conversation I'd ever had with anyone in Gage's family. Gage and I had a few hard conversations about how long he'd known his mother was like this, about how many times he'd chosen peace over me. He didn't defend himself. He just listened, and then he said, "I'm choosing differently now." I went back to work the Monday after the gathering and told Renata's temporary replacement that I needed to talk about my workload. That conversation wasn't easy either, but I had it. Something about standing in that kitchen, watching a cobbler get thrown in the trash and choosing not to shrink, made every other hard conversation feel survivable. Tatum's ear infection cleared up. The weather cooled down. I never got an apology from Paulette, but I stopped needing one. Last I heard, she'd told her church friends that Gage and I were going through something, and that she was giving us space to work it out, framing it like she was the generous one. That's fine. I know what happened. Gage knows, Waverly knows, and Colleen, healing up from surgery, calling me every Sunday now, she knows too. Some stories don't end with the villain getting punished. They end with you finally understanding that the villain's opinion never should have had that much power in the first place. Have you ever had someone in your family who made you feel like nothing you did was ever good enough? And what was the moment you finally stopped trying to earn their approval? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this one hit close to home, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. I share stories like this every week, and I think you'll find something here that feels familiar. Take care of yourselves.